Hey everybody, my name is Denise and I want to spend a couple minutes with you giving you some tips on how I make the masks for the Project Protect for our Utah COVID crisis that we have going on. So chances are pretty good if you're watching this video, you have volunteered to help sew some masks. When I found out that the estimated time to complete 100 masks, they said was 10 to 15 hours, I accepted the challenge and it took me I'd say about 3.5 hours to sew 100. So I just want to give you a few tips on how I went about doing that. Hopefully it helps. So for starters, I'm just going to take the original pre-cut mask piece, fold it in half, and then I'm just going to stitch across, as I'm sure you already knew how to do. So I have a 1/4 inch foot on my machine. Doesn't necessarily need to be an exact 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I'm just going to stitch across here. No reason to back stitch at the beginning because we're just going to be stitching across that in a second. So I'm just going to stitch across here. I don't pin this, I just keep my hand kind of firm on the front end of the fabric to keep it in place. And to be totally honest with you guys, if it's not wicked perfect, it's gonna be okay because, well, you're gonna stitch ties across it in a second, but these are gonna be a one-time use. The goal is that they protect somebody, obviously, from the germs. And I think this is going to get the job done even if your seams aren't totally perfect. So then what I'm going to do after I stitch one is I'm just going to take the next one and feed it right in there. Your sewing machine's feed dogs are just going to grab right onto the fabric and feed it right in there. So the way I was able to finish this first step in about 30 minutes was by just feeding them in continuous and just continuing on like that. You might find that this gets really monotonous after doing a bunch, so do maybe, I don't know, 25 at a time and do all the steps through for 25 and then move on to your next batch. Or if you're really feeling like you're on a roll, then do all 100 for the first step and continue on from there. So I'm gonna continue on sewing my first step for all of these and I'll meet you back in a minute to show you the next step. So once you have your entire chain done, like I said, I had 100 before, so I actually folded mine into halves and quarters, and then I snipped apart in between several at one time. So go ahead and snip yours apart, and then what you're going to do is turn the mask. So just turn that. Be careful not to pull too much on the edges because you didn't back stitch this. So we're going to turn here. I kind of fold it in, I didn't really fold it, but I just kind of lay it in half and sort of finger press the seam. And that way I can just get that seam laid flat to crease the folded end. And then it's ready for the next step. So go ahead and do that for all of your units that you're working with. And then what I just started to do is stack them up together and give that edge a little finger press there. That's gonna help you with the next step. So go ahead and do that and we'll meet back. So the next step is to create my pleats in my mask material here. The fold is up at the top. I love how it has the notches in there. That's such a time saver. So when I get to the machine, I'm just gonna start stitching. I have increased my length on my stitch slightly. I have it at a 3.0, whereas my normal stitch length is at about a 2.5, because I'm gonna baste this in here. And if I miss something, it's a little bit easier to take out, but this stitching isn't gonna show. This is just gonna help me keep my pleats in place for me. And I'm stitching it a 1/4 inch or less because, like I said, it's basting and the tie is eventually going to cover over that. So I start stitching, go down a little bit. I like to have my needle end down when I stop stitching. And I'm going to grab this bottom pleat right here. I'm just going to pinch this right here and I'm going to bring it up to meet right here. So those notches are just gonna line up and I'm gonna walk that up to the machine. I'm not pinning it and I'm gonna stop it right after I stitch that pleat. So let me do it again on the bottom. I'm gonna pinch right here and then walk it right up to where it meets the notch up at the top and then just stitch it into my machine. And then I'm gonna grab my next one and do the exact same thing. So start stitching just a tiny bit up at the top, pinch at the little dart there, and walk it up to the next dart, and stitch. Pinch the pleat, walk it up, and stitch. That's gonna get covered, so if you're not totally perfectly lined up, it's gonna be okay. But that's the way I did that pretty quickly, so I didn't really use pins. If you need to use pins, that's the way to do it. I very highly recommend not stitching over your pins. That runs into problems on your sewing machine. And we at Nuttall see a lot of machines come in where people have sewn over their pins and cause a problem. So anyway, I'm gonna continue with one side until those are all done. So I stitched all of one side for 2 of them. I'll show you for 2. And then I'm going to swing my fabric around. And this time I'm actually gonna start from the bottom edge where the seam is. Before I started from the top where the fold is. This time I'm gonna start from the seam side, and I'll just stitch a little bit to get started. And then what I do on this side is I actually pinch the top pleat and walk it down and kind of tuck the other stuff in and go down. So again, grab the top pleat and scoot it a little bit on me. Grab the top pleat and walk it down to the bottom. And I've still got my chain connected over here, so my next one is just like right in my cube right there. So I'm gonna start stitching just a little bit, grab the top pleat and tuck everything in and walk it down. Grab the top pleat, push everything in and walk it down. So continue on like that, and that should be a pretty quick repetitive process. We're almost done. All we have to do is stitch on the ties, and I'll give you a couple of quick tips on that. Okay, you guys, we're already on the last step. So I have my pleats done in my mask. I've got one tie ready to go. I've changed stitches, so I'm gonna use for this, I call it a serpentine stitch. It's like a dotted zigzag, or it might look like a wavy zigzag or like an S. If you're sewing on a Bernina, as I am tonight, it's stitch number 4, and that's pretty universal for Bernina sewing machines. So I have in the tie, there's a little notch cut out in the middle. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the folded edge is the top, the seamed edge is the bottom. So I'm gonna start with the folded edge, and what I do is I haven't like pinned my tie or creased my tie or anything like that. I'm just gonna take about the halfway point between the top and my first pleat, and I'm gonna line that up with about the halfway point of the tie right at that notch. Okay, so the fabric is about in the middle. If I were to fold this tiny bit in half, it's about at that middle point, and the notch meets in the middle of this section here. It's about 1 inch down, but obviously I'm not gonna go nuts and measure that. It's gonna be awesome. It's gonna fit awesome. And then I'm just gonna crease that over, fold that over, and that's all I'm gonna worry about for right now. I'm gonna come up to the top. The reason that I've chosen to use the serpentine stitch is because it's dotted, so it's gonna do a lot of little stitches in there, and they're short and close together, so the likelihood of them coming out in one wear is pretty unlikely in my opinion. So I'm not needing to back stitch or do 2 rows. This is just gonna be 1 row, and I think it works really quick and smooth. So I'm just gonna start up at the top, and that serpentine stitch is gonna just kind of center right in the middle of that tie there, and it's really gonna be secure. Once I get a couple of stitches in place, I'm gonna put a little bit of tension on the bottom of the mask and fold the rest of my pleat over and then just stitch. So I never had to like go in there and crease that or get crazy or anything. I'm just holding a slight amount of tension on here as I walk it all the way up to the top. Once I'm done with one, I raise my presser foot, however you need to do that, and then I'm just gonna take the next one, sneak it in there, leave a small little gap in between, and I will take my next one and line it up the exact same way. Notice I'm not using pins at all. I'm gonna sneak that right in there. And then once I've got it anchored in a little bit, just line up the bottom, crease it over, and go to town. So that should make that, this process takes the longest of all the steps, but it's the final one, and then you're done. So I hope that helps. If you have questions, let me know. Thank you for participating in this project. It's a pretty cool feeling, not only when you complete your set of 100, but also to know that what you've done is gonna help a lot of people. So thank you, and I hope to hear some questions. Have a good night.